Star Trek Academy Collision Course, Chapter 13. Sit down, kid. Mallory indicated the chair across the table. Is it James or Jim? Tiberius? Kirk sat down, leaned back, crossed his arms. Doesn't matter. Mallory nodded at Agent Gilfillan, who looked weary after her long night questioning Kirk. Kirk took pride in having worn her down. At 17, he felt on top of his game, indestructible. Gilfillan remained in the corridor, touched a control to seal the door of the interrogation room. Mallory waited until the door closed before he spoke again. James, then. You don't look like a Tiberius. Kirk shrugged. This man's assessments meant nothing to him. Old family name? Mallory asked. My grandfather had a thing about him. The Emperor? Kirk thought that was a strange question. Yeah. Because there was another one, not quite as well known and not quite as bloodthirsty. Kirk hadn't known that. Another Emperor Tiberius? No, a politician, 2 centuries before the Emperor. A strong spokesman for farmers' rights. I thought that might have been the connection. Was your grandfather a farmer too? Kirk nodded, his interest somewhat sparked. So, no other emperors? Roman emperors? No. But there was a Byzantine emperor with the same name about 500 years later. You know a lot about history. Mallory gave him a half smile, the expression hard to read. A little. Does it matter? Kirk grasped that he was being lightly mocked, but ignored that to push this curious exchange to whatever limits he'd be allowed to. For my grandfather, it was definitely the Roman Emperor Tiberius. Any idea what the fascination was? Kirk shifted in his chair, engaged now despite himself, studying Mallory as intently as Mallory studied him. Kirk understood that they were each trying to get the other's measure. A life of contradictions, my grandfather said, full of lessons. Mallory appeared to be genuinely interested, which Kirk suspected was a ploy, just as his attempt to change the subject to Mallory's knowledge of history had been. What kind of lessons? Brilliant general who became a depraved and hated ruler. You know, find what you're good at and stick to it, that kind of thing. What are you good at? Here we go, Kirk thought. But he wasn't about to let this old guy win so easily. He pointed to Mallory's pad. Special Agent Gilfillan had my life history on her pad. If you're her boss, you've got it too. I'm not her boss. This time Kirk refused to ask the obvious question. Gilfillan had manipulated him that way, and he wasn't about to let it happen again. Mallory didn't let the silence remain unfilled. Surprisingly, as if acknowledging Kirk's strategy, he turned on the pad. Kirk's eyes raced across it. Even upside down, he recognized his own flyer's license ID image. But he didn't recognize the form it was displayed on, although he could see that the form had a Starfleet emblem at the top. I'm just someone who likes history, Mallory said, answering the unasked question anyway, as he tapped his way through several other forms on the pad's display, as if reviewing them. Kirk had the feeling, though, that whatever was in his record, Mallory was like his father and had every word memorized already. Can you guess why? Kirk tried another tactic. You like to live in the past? But Mallory didn't even react to his attempt at an insult. Patterns, he said. You've heard that old saying. Those who don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it? I guess. Kirk wondered what all this had to do with him. It's true, Mallory said with a curious frown. For 7,000 years or so, humans appear to have lived in a permanent state of forgetfulness. 7,000 years from the first agricultural communities to the great urban centers of the 21st century, Not one generation free of war or famine or injustice. And then we woke up. It took the worst war we'd ever experienced. But out of all that came Cochrane and a new generation that for the first time wouldn't forget, because the pattern was broken. So no more wars, no more need, no more injustice. The world, our world, is the way it is today because we remember the patterns of history and we do not repeat them. You can skip the lecture, Kirk said. I didn't steal the Starfleet staff car. Mallory regarded him with cool amusement. Did I ask you if you had? Kirk realized he had fallen for a more subtle interrogation technique. For the first time, he began to feel he was beyond his depth. He had no clue what Mallory was up to, only that his interrogator had some agenda as yet unknown to him. You were going to. But Mallory shook his head. You spent 4 hours denying it with Agent Gilfillan. Why would I waste time going down that road again? Kirk's eyes narrowed. What was this guy after? What does he want from me? Because I'm looking for patterns, Mallory said, answering his own question. He patted the edge of the pad. I've got your whole life story to check, most of it, at least. Those words contained a threat. Kirk was sure of it. He tensed, waiting, wondering. Face the facts, kid. Whether you did it or not, the theft of that car is the reason why you're here. Whether you did it or not. Kirk couldn't get his head around the meaning of that statement. For that reason alone, SCIS did what any investigatory body would do. Checked your records to see if you've ever been involved in anything like this before. Kirk sat up straighter. Did they check the Vulcan's records? Mallory's response rebuked him. I'm not here to talk about the Vulcan. Kirk slouched in his hard-backed chair, sullen. Whatever you say. He stared past Mallory at one of the imagers mounted high on the plain, dull Starfleet blue walls, letting whoever was watching know how totally uninvolved and bored he was. So here's my problem. Your records don't make sense. That's not my fault. Mallory held the pad so Kirk couldn't see it, even upside down. Didn't say it was. Have you ever been off-world? Kirk felt his stomach tighten. Here it comes. Yeah, sure. Been to the moon on class trips. Tranquility Park? The alien ruins? Kirk nodded. Anywhere else? Pluto. The museum's there. Jonathan Archer's ship? Kirk shook his head. He looked around, seeking another imager. Mallory repeated his question. No. You don't like starships, I take it. No. Odd thing, Mallory said. He ran his finger across the pad's unseen display. It says here you joined the Star Cadets when you were 8. Set a record for merit badges in your age group. Before that, you were in the Junior Explorers. He turned the pad around, and Kirk was mortified to see an image of himself, age 5, in a baggy blue jumpsuit with a ball cap pulled down so far it made his ears stick out like warp nacelles. His hand was engulfed by his father's. That was all of Joe Kirk that was in the image. Is that your father? Kirk's voice hardened. Look, if you have something to say, say it. I'm not here to reminisce about all the goofy stuff I did when I was a kid, okay? Mallory tapped onto another page. On 14 January 2246, you visited the Laurel Blair Salton Medical Clinic in Des Moines. So you had a series of inoculations and protein inhibitors that in my day we used to call the spaceman's cocktail. What's that got to do with anything? There's only one reason a 13-year-old gets that battery of injections. You were going to be exposed to an alien ecosystem. Kirk took a chance to bring this unwanted intrusion to an end. He leaned forward to make his demand. Is there anything in those records that says I was exposed to an alien ecosystem? Not a word, Mallory said, his attention still on the pad. And that's what strikes my interest. It means your pattern's fractured somehow. Smart kid. Loves space travel. Junior explorer, star cadet. Apparently obsessed with collecting merit badges, plus top grades at school. Mallory briefly glanced up at Kirk. Same patterns I see in the records of my bosses, Starfleet admirals for the most part. Kirk's face felt stiff. It was all he could do not to throttle Mallory, not to try to escape by any means. Mallory went back to reading the pad. So you get all the shots you'd need to go to an alien world, but you don't go anywhere. As far as the records are concerned, about a year later, you went on a week-long school trip to Pluto, and that's all. Apparently, you haven't been off-world since. That's what I said. Kirk crossed his arms tightly, all too aware of the hammering in his chest. I'm more interested in what you didn't say. You got the shots. You didn't go anywhere. By the next school year, you were barely getting by. You borrowed one of your teacher's flyers. I see the Riverside Protectors have sealed a file on you, which means you got up to something. Maybe now you can see my problem. Silence. Kirk stared down at the table. He wanted to run so badly he felt the icy air burn his throat again as he screamed for Donnie to keep going to the arena and heard the other kids with the red bandanas calling for him, hunting them all because of... So tell me, what happened 3 years ago? Kirk stared at the man, loathing him, loathing Starfleet, loathing everything and everyone who'd brought him to this moment. Because something did happen, Mallory said. At 17, Kirk's only weapon was defiance. Mallory studied him for a moment, then turned off the pad, placed it on the table. Then he got up, went to the closed doors, and punched a code into the control panel there. The door remained closed. Mallory took his seat again. I just turned off the imagers. Whatever we say now is just between us. Like, I believe you. I'm not doing this for you, you know. I'm doing it for me. I work for Starfleet. Nice uniform, Kirk said. Mallory looked down at his rumpled civilian suit. Isn't it? He agreed, unruffled. Then he regarded Kirk calmly. I have access to records SCIS doesn't even know exist. I've turned off the imagers because I need to keep those records secret. And you're going to tell them to me? You already know them. Don't say it, Kirk thought wildly, but he said nothing, could say nothing. Mallory placed his hands palms down on the table. What do you know about a colony world called Nothing? Kirk shouted. He leapt to his feet. This is over, all right? You wanted to find out about a stupid stolen car? You asked your stupid questions. Now let me go. Mallory stayed motionless in his chair. Maybe I should tell you what I know about Tarsus IV and Governor Kodos. They called him the Executioner. Kirk dropped back into his chair, his legs trembling so violently he could no longer stand. There was nothing this man could tell him that he didn't already know. He had been on Tarsus IV. 3 years later, he was still there. Chapter 14. Everything was wrong. Nothing was as it should be. Instead of sun, there was darkness. Instead of laughter, there was pain. Instead of life, there was death. 4,000 bodies, crisped by laser fire. A week after the colony's revolution, they lay blackened, bloated, unburied, and in the midst of everything that was wrong, a boy. His name was Jimmy Kirk, and he was 14 years old, plus a month, more or less. Fear overwhelmed him. His legs were rubber, his stomach a tensed fist twisting his insides, his arms ice cold, and not just from the gusting snow and ice that cut through his tattered shirt with each blast of wind. He was being hunted, and he knew he was going to die at any moment. His parents, his brother, his dog, his bed, they were light years away, and his friends? That's what chilled him more than the ever-present ice and snow. His best friend, Matthew Call, 14 and 2 months, was a killer who pursued him. He'd been running and hiding and foraging for days and knew there was no hope he could run far enough, hide well enough. Foraging didn't matter because there was no food. He tried chewing dried grass dug up from the ice-covered ground, somehow managed to choke it down, but it had only made him gag and spit up harsh bile. That had been 3 days ago, he thought, maybe 4. That was something else that was wrong. There were no more days, no more nights, no sense of time at all, only fear of his best friend and death. But still he ran, tears frozen on his grime-streaked face, yellow mucus crusted on his reddened nose, his lips cracked and flaked with dying skin, his bare feet beyond sensation, but still he ran. The reason was simple. He was not alone. The kids from his cabin, there were 4 left out of 24. Tay Hebert, 9. Edith Zaglada, 8. Billy Klutz, 7. Donnie Roy, 4. And since he was the oldest, he was the one in charge. That was the rule of the cabins and the farms and the colony. Jimmy had always followed the rules, always. He heard shouted voices and looked up, frightened for his small charges. The voice came from past the old supply depot, where the frozen mud road turned toward the center of the colony. He could still see tendrils of smoke oozing from charred wooden beams that once held up the depot's roof. 3 of the building's gray brick walls were still standing, mostly, their windows blown out. Some of the adults had fought back on the night the governor had made his announcement. But the governor's men had had the only guns. The governor's men and the kids who'd helped them. "Over there, I see him!" The words were faint against the wind, but clear enough. Death was near. He had to save the children. He looked around wildly, then pointed to the arena. That way! The domed structure had once held seats for 1,200 people. The colonists had played soccer and lacrosse there, put on plays, rode their horses, held their general meetings. Now half the buildings seemed to have been flattened by a giant's fist. On the sagging roof that was left, strips of gray insulation waved in the wind like seaweed on a drowned shipwreck. But he'd spied a small opening in one rubble-mounded wall. Small bodies could crawl through it. Adults couldn't. He ran for the dark opening, half dragging little Donnie, while the others stumbled after him. No one cried anymore. That had stopped a day ago. They just did what he told them to do, trusting him, because there was no one else to mind and nothing else to do. He reached the wall first, set Donnie down carefully, then launched himself through the opening. The broken blocks and mortar cut into his knees and hands, but what he'd hoped for was true. One quick glimpse confirmed that the opening was a tunnel, and it led into an undamaged part of the arena. He scrambled back to fetch the others. "Hurry up!" he whispered to himself as he pulled them through. "Hurry up!" Then he gagged as the stink of rotting flesh swept over him. He whirled around and wished he hadn't. Bodies all over the floor of the arena, contorted, pleading, carbonized. He covered little Donnie's eyes with his hand and used his body to shield the others. "Keep going! Go! Get under the stands!" Weak sunlight from outside showed the way to a hiding place under the tiered seats. They huddled there, shivering, trying not to think of the stench and the terrors it brought back. "Jimmy, come out, wherever you are." The challenge reverberated in the arena. Jimmy knew that voice. It belonged to Matthew, his best friend. He looked at each of the children in turn, shaking his head and miming, covering his mouth and then his ears. With wide eyes, they obeyed his call for silence, but he saw their bodies shaking. Approaching footsteps crunched heavily over frosted ground, over rubble, over bodies. "We've got a sensor. We're gonna find you." Tay looked up at Jimmy with frightened eyes. "They know where we are," he whispered. It was over. Jimmy knew that he had failed. By anyone's reckoning, it was a disaster, Mallory said quietly, and the worst of it was, everyone could have survived the famine, the Vulcan relief mission, and a contingent of Starfleet security forces got there less than a month after the massacre. Mallory continued, but with no records, the colony's processing center was destroyed. There's no way for anyone to know which of the 8,000 colonists Kodos had been before he took on that name and became governor. So all those responsible got away. Kodos and everyone who helped him seize power and carry out the slaughter, they all either burned to death or escaped. Kirk sat rigid, staring at nothing, no one. The news spread, of course, but so much was riding on tracking Kodos, if he was still alive, that the Bureau of Colonial Affairs kept a lot of the details under wraps. Kirk didn't move. Specifically, that there had been 9 survivors who could identify Kodos. I think the BCA wanted to make sure they were safe from retribution. Kirk said nothing. 4 of these eyewitnesses were small children, just kids. 3 were saved by a 14-year-old boy. Kirk made his decision. If he confessed to stealing the staff car, then Sam and Alyssa would be protected. The Vulcan would be in the clear, and most important, he could get out of here. But Mallory's next words caused him to hesitate. "Interesting thing," Mallory said. "Those witnesses' identities are so well protected, even I can't get access to their names. Yet if I could talk to that boy, and he'd be about your age today, I'd tell him he was a hero. And I'd tell him that the qualities he demonstrated on Tarsus IV are unique enough to make some people give him a second look, even grant him some extra latitude, if he ever needed help, that is." Kirk started, surprised, when Mallory's communicator chimed sharply. "Just a second." Mallory flipped the communicator open. "Mallory, go ahead." Kirk tried but couldn't hear a thing. That meant Mallory had a privacy earpiece so only he could listen to his caller. After a few moments, Mallory said, "Agreed," then flipped the device shut and stood up. "Processing says you and the Vulcan have visitors." Kirk pushed back his chair and got to his feet. His legs still felt unsteady, probably because of exhaustion, though he had no idea what time it was. He knew it was well into the morning, which meant he hadn't slept for at least 30 hours. Maybe he wasn't completely indestructible. "You looked like you were going to say something there," Mallory suggested. But when Kirk didn't reply, he didn't persist. He went to the door controls and entered his code. The door slid open. "Maybe he wasn't a hero," Kirk said. "That boy on Tarsus IV." Mallory turned around and regarded him quizzically. "Even with what little I know, it's pretty clear he risked his own life to save others. What would you call him?" "He only saved 3, Kirk said. "A lot of other kids died." "Would you blame him for their deaths?" "No, that's Starfleet's fault." "Go see your visitors," Mallory said. "We'll talk again." Chapter 15. Spock sat cross-legged on the fold-down bench, hands steepled in the basic meditative form known as Shalofi, the second foundation of inner breath. It was one of the first states of mindful balance he had achieved as a child, and he found it easy to enter even under the most disruptive of circumstances. And being locked in a holding cell in Starfleet headquarters certainly was disruptive. He did not choose to repeat the wrenching sensation of attempting a deeper state of balance, and then being torn from it by an unexpected diversion. The one experience of that with Special Agent Rickard had been enough. Spock did not know what to think. He felt sure he had not betrayed his emotions. As from a distance he heard the holding cell force field switch off, and the security bars slide open. Spock held his position, satisfied that he had chosen the correct meditative strategy, because the noise didn't disrupt the balance he had achieved, aware, yet restful. And then, just as satisfaction began most improperly to turn to pride within him, he felt and heard the fold-down bench creak as a heavy mass impacted it, and he was nearly pitched forward to the floor. Spock caught himself, barely, all sense of calm gone because of, beside him, the human, Jim Kirk, sprawled on the far end of the bench, back against the wall. He caught Spock looking at him. "How's it going?" Kirk asked. From his tone, he did not expect or want an answer, which was just as well because Spock had no idea what the human's words meant. "Could you clarify the question?" Kirk glanced around the cell, apparently looking for something on the walls, then shifted sideways closer. He spoke softly as if trying to avoid illegal listening technology. "Look, I got this figured out." "Indeed." Spock was no closer to comprehending him. "But first I gotta know what you told them." "Can you be specific? I told them many things." "Great. Take me through the high points." He glanced at something on the side of Spock's head and gave a little snort of amusement. Spock reached up and pushed his long hair back over his ear. "What did you tell them about the car?" Kirk asked. "I know nothing about the car. Accordingly, I told them nothing." "Okay, that's good. How about the override?" "You put that in my pocket." "Okay, and I said I stopped you from trying to put it in mine, so we balance out there. Except my statement is truthful and your statement is a lie." Kirk seemed to think that wasn't an important distinction. "Vulcans never lie?" "Never," Spock lied. "Okay, forget that stuff. It's not important anyway. Here's how it's going to work out." Kirk glanced at the door where the security bars were once again in place, and the force field emitters glowed around the frame. "These clowns can't—" "I saw no clowns," Spock interrupted. Kirk stared at him in silence for a moment, then began again, speaking slowly, as if he doubted Spock's command of human language. "The SCIS agents can't figure out which one of us was involved with the missing staff car. And since they can't pin the crime on either one of us, they have to let us both go. Simple, right?" Spock thought it over. The legal system on this planet was predicated on the principle that no innocent party should suffer, even if it meant some guilty parties might go free. Under those conditions, Jim Kirk had reached a valid conclusion. "Quite logical," Spock said. He was surprised the human was capable of such reasoning. Kirk grinned, punched him on the shoulder. "That's what I said." Spock drew back, startled. "You said no such thing. Why did you hit me?" Kirk looked at his fist. "That wasn't a hit. That was a playful tap. Congratulations, because our team's going to win." Spock began to feel uneasy, almost nervous. For whatever reason, after the human's initial display of logic, he was now reverting to spouting gibberish. Even more surprising, the human indicated he had sensed Spock's true reactions, though Spock felt sure he had not betrayed emotions. Kirk shifted down the bench. "I apologize for the punch. It's a human thing. No offense." "None taken." "But we are going to get out of this." "Good," Spock said. "You said it." Before Spock could correct that statement, Kirk closed his eyes and leaned back against the hard wall with both hands behind his head. When Spock had decided the human had calmed down sufficiently, he said, "I do have one question." Kirk opened his eyes. "Shoot." "I have no weapon." Kirk closed his eyes again, and Spock wondered if he needed more rest. "Figure of speech. Stretch. What's the question?" "I'm curious about the clowns." For some reason unfathomable to Spock, Kirk started laughing. Spock concluded such a reaction must stem from something the aforementioned clowns had done earlier, and felt a strange mixture of curiosity and revulsion. To a Vulcan, The idea that a specific class of performers existed whose sole purpose was to elicit from their audience an intensely personal emotional response in public was repugnant, but to Spock it was also strangely fascinating. He often wondered what his response to a clown might be. One possibility was that such an encounter might confirm his mastery of self-control and he would not laugh. But another, more troubling possibility was that he would lose all Vulcan reason and his human half would rise unbound to the surface of his mind and shame him. Spock frequently had nightmares in which he arrived at school and suddenly broke into laughter or tears. Though he could never discuss such a thing with his parents or his peers, since accompanying his parents to Earth, clowns had become a constant source of concern to him. "When we get out of here," Kirk said after he caught his breath, "I'm going to buy you a slang translator. Vulcans have slang, don't they?" Spock knew what slang meant and shook his head. A word is what it is, or it is not. The Vulcan term is kaith. A quantum language. How about that? Spock stared at the human, struck by the insight that was both fascinating and true, and wondered if it was at all possible that what Kirk had just said was something that he had meant to say. Could this young human actually have knowledge of the quantum characteristics of energy and matter, and the intellectual imagination to abstract that concept to the underlying cultural structure of Vulcan languages and dialects? It didn't seem possible. Indeed, Spock said, because once again Kirk left him with no idea what to say in reply. The force field hum died, and both Kirk and Spock looked to the doorway as the security bars slid open again. Mallory entered with a younger man, wearing the bright red shirt of a Starfleet security officer. He was the first uniformed Starfleet member Spock had seen in headquarters. The Starfleet officer was unsmiling and carried a metal case with an indecipherable serial number stenciled on its side. "James," Mallory said, and nodded at Spock, and he glanced at his pad. "Mr. Spock, I have your first name here, but I will spare us both the embarrassment of listening to me try to pronounce it. Could you both stand, please?" Spock rose to his feet and stood as if at parade rest, hands behind his back. Kirk got up slowly, dragging out the moment to show his disrespect for Mallory. Spock did not approve. We're in a bit of a bind, boys," Mallory continued. "Because of the override, we know that one or the other of you was involved in the staff car theft. What we don't know is which one of you it was." Kirk gave Spock a sideways glance. When Spock met it, Kirk winked. Mallory gave no sign of having noticed the exchange. "Therefore, it seems the only plausible assumption is that you were working together, so Starfleet will be prosecuting you both for..." He checked his pad for the terminology, as if he had never had to say the words before. "Grand larceny. How archaic." Spock kept his expression neutral, telling himself that there was nothing humans could do that could surprise him. Kirk's eyes flashed. "Come on, I told you I never met this guy before last night." Mallory wasn't swayed. "It's not up to me anymore. You'll be talking to a judge. Hearing set for next Thursday." 5 days? Kirk protested. "You can't keep us here 5 days." "We can, but your records are more or less clean, so we won't." Mallory gestured to the security officer, and the man opened his case to reveal 2 gray metal bracelets. "You're both free to leave," Mallory explained, "as long as you consent to wear these tracking modules. They'll transmit an alarm to Starfleet security if you venture more than 5 kilometers outside the city limits. They're also linked together through a subspace transponder, and an alarm will be sent if you get within 20 meters of each other. Understand? One of the conditions of your release is that you have no contact with each other." Spock dutifully held out his right hand. Kirk grudgingly did the same. "Never saw you before," he said to Spock between clenched teeth. "Don't care if I ever do again." Spock was curious about Mallory's evident self-control. He seemed to be unresponsive to Kirk's defiant attitude and statements. A security officer snapped a tracking module around Spock's wrist, then Kirk's with a solid snap, a sound immediately followed by the sizzle of molecular bonding. Spock studied the bracelet-shaped device with interest. "An efficient design," he said. Kirk glared at him. Mallory added another caveat to their instructions. "I'm sure I don't have to add that if either of you even attempt to remove the tracker, security officers will beam to your location and immediately return you to custody until the hearing. Any questions?" Spock wanted to ask what powered the subspace transmitter and how the 5-kilometer limit was determined. By following the city limits proper or by a radius measured from a central point to provide an average distance. It was an intriguing problem. But Kirk said, "No. Can we go now?" Mallory gestured to the open door. "Your father's waiting for you outside, processing." Spock saw Kirk frown. "Great," the human said. Mallory turned to Spock. "The embassy sent an attaché escort to escort you back to the compound." "Of course," Spock said. "My parents have other business to attend to." "Lucky you," Kirk said as he started toward the door. Spock considered that puzzling statement during the short drive back to the Vulcan embassy. He did not think of himself as lucky. Indeed, if he were not Vulcan, he decided he might envy Kirk for having the interest and attention of his father, if he were not Vulcan. Chapter 16. 33 years earlier, the shuttlecraft Helen Hogg had served with distinction on the USS Endurance. Among its most notable historic missions, the small Warp-3 vehicle had carried delegates to the Babel Conference that had ratified the independence of Earth's oldest extrasolar colony world, New Montana, where Zephram Cochrane himself had settled. But, inevitably obsolete and outmoded, the venerable spacecraft had long since taken its last voyage. In the company of a dozen other fleet vehicles of various classes, it now spent its days in the vast hangar of the Tucker Systematic Center, being respectfully taken apart and reassembled by eager young Academy midshipmen. The two mids who worked on the HH today were Alyssa Corso and Z. Bailoff, gaining extra credits before the first semester of their second year began. 3 days earlier, a fiendishly clever third-year lab instructor had set up a fault in the shuttle's impulse power system that, bafflingly, also created an offset in the navigation system and made life support erratic. Now, even with most of the shuttle's hull plates removed and half the spacecraft's transmission network disassembled on the spotless gray plating of the hangar floor, the two young mids were no closer to resolving the issue than they were when they opened their first access panel. So, for the moment, they did what any engineer would do: stood back and surveyed the chaos they had created from the once sleek vehicle, oblivious to the noisy tools and equipment of the other teams working on the other sacrificial shuttles and spacecraft scattered throughout the hangar, focusing only on the problem before them. "This is what I'm thinking," Z finally said. "What if there are 3 separate faults?" Alyssa wore her ball cap backward to keep the bill from hitting the circuits she'd been testing up close. She pushed it back even farther to scratch her flattened hair. "Except Carmichael told us there was one underlying root cause." Z's blonde hair was short enough that she didn't wear a cap, and somehow on her, even the shapeless pale blue mechanic's overalls she wore seemed fashionable. "Maybe that's part of the test. The initial report was flawed, but since we didn't question it, we've just wasted 3 days on a false assumption." Alyssa tried to grapple with the part of that conclusion that troubled her the most. You're saying Carmichael deliberately misled us? Welcome to the real world, Z laughed. And Alyssa was surprised at her scornful tone. If you were on the engineering staff of a starship, and the chief told you to perform a specific repair, maybe the first step is to confirm the chief's diagnosis of the fault. Put that way, Alyssa saw the solution was obvious. Carmichael's a hard case, isn't he? Yeah, but that's probably what makes him a good instructor. Z gave Alyssa a cynical smile. People lie, fact of life. Alyssa sighed. So, you deconstruct the nav components, and I'll tackle life support? Sounds like a plan. The two slapped hands and went off in search of the new tools they'd need. That was when Alyssa saw her company commander approach with an older civilian she didn't recognize. Ms. Corso, the CC barked. Front and center. Alyssa instantly double-timed it to the two men. Her company commander was a fourth-class mid, rigid but fair, who kept his head as closely shaved as if he were still a plebe. The man with him was older, his hair white, his suit badly in need of a sonic to eliminate all of its wrinkles. Midshipman Corso reporting, sir. Alyssa stood at attention. Her CC referred to the visitor. This is Mr. Mallory from command. You're going to talk to him. Yes, sir. Alyssa could guess what the topic of the conversation was going to be. The company commander looked over at the disassembled shuttlecraft where Z was already removing a square of inertial damping mesh from the forward hull, part of the navigational positioning subsystem. What's your status on that? We've developed a new approach to solving the problem, sir. New approach. Good. I want a full written report by 0700 tomorrow. Yes, sir. Carry on. Alyssa and Mallory watched the fourth-year mid march off. Will that be a lot of work? Mallory asked. The report? Alyssa remained at attention. No, sir. Eddie's been shipping. This isn't an official visit. That statement confused Alyssa, but she relaxed. Yes, sir. And I'm not an officer, so call me Mallory and I'll call you Alyssa. Is that all right? Yes, she caught herself. Mallory. So I've just been reviewing your file and I see you're facing an honor board hearing over the dilithium theft. Alyssa felt even more confused. This man worked at Starfleet Command, but dressed like someone who had never seen a proper uniform. And he was talking about our honor board as if it were something of passing interest and not the reason for his visit. That's correct. She managed to cut off the sir before she began to say it that time. For what it's worth, and I don't really know if I should be telling you this, but there's no evidence to suggest you actually took the dilithium yourself. Alyssa almost rocked back on her heels. So great was her relief. Really? You're not off the hook, though. Alyssa felt the weight of injustice descend on her again. Permission to ask why? Your ID codes were definitely used by the actual thieves to gain access to the warp lab and to open the storage vault. So, at worst, you might be a knowing accomplice, which the investigators appear to doubt, but at best, you were negligent in protecting your codes. Alyssa was back where she had started. I can still be separated for that. You can. Alyssa still didn't know what Mallory wanted from her, unless it was to make her feel more miserable than she already did. She looked back at Z, who was taking field readings off the damping mesh she'd wired to a test bench. May I ask if there is something else you wanted to talk to me about? When she turned back to Mallory, she saw that he did have another topic of conversation in mind. In his hand, he held Jim's override. Is this yours? Mallory asked. There were many ways Mallory might have asked that question, but he had fortunately chosen one that Alyssa could answer honestly without getting Jim in trouble. No, sir. I ask because it's programmed with your codes. This isn't the transmitter the dilithium thieves used, but it can do exactly the same thing. Alyssa didn't risk opening her mouth, and Mallory stopped waiting for her to say something. Starfleet found this device in the possession of a young man, James Kirk. Up to that point, Alyssa had felt justified in not volunteering any new information that might hurt others, but she wasn't about to play games with someone from command. If Mallory knew about her relationship with Jim, then there was no reason to remain silent. He's my boyfriend. Oh, I know. That's why I'm here. He was taken into custody last night on suspicion of stealing a Starfleet flyer. Jim would never do anything like that, sir. Mallory. Even so, it turns out that this device does have the capability of defeating the basic security lockouts on non-critical Starfleet equipment. It's very clever. Mallory looked from the override to Alyssa. Did you give him your codes so he could use them in this? Alyssa could not lie to this man, not just because she was a midshipman at Starfleet Academy, but because she was not the kind of person who would lie in any event, which is why she was a midshipman. So even though she knew what she was about to say could lead to her immediate separation from the Academy, Alyssa squared her shoulders and answered Mallory's question as befit a Starfleet officer candidate. I did give him my codes, but only after the dilithium went missing. Mallory didn't interrupt, so she continued. Jim is convinced that the lab security isn't as foolproof as the investigators claim it is, and he basically built that override in a day to prove to me how easy it is to circumvent Starfleet security safeguards. And he demonstrated it by overriding the staff car's controls. Alyssa took another deep breath, knowing she was digging herself in deeper. He did some research and figured out that the car in the lab had the same level of built-in security. Your boyfriend was right. Alyssa was surprised to catch a hint of what might have been admiration in Mallory's statement. Was there a Vulcan with you last night? No, sir. Mallory. Alyssa was surprised by the question. What did that have to do with anything? I've never met a Vulcan on Earth. I mean, other than Ambassador T'Pol when she lectured here last year, but that was just a receiving line. Does your boyfriend know any Vulcans? Jim's never mentioned knowing any. Alyssa thought carefully. I'd be surprised if he did. He's not the adventurous type. I mean, not when it comes to space and aliens and Starfleet, Mallory suggested. He's not what you would call a supporter, but you are. Alyssa smiled. I grew up on Risa. Half the population is alien. Mallory slipped the override into his pocket. Any idea what happened to the car? Alyssa didn't know why this civilian hadn't mentioned Jim's brother yet, so she decided it would be all right if she didn't, either unless specifically asked. When Jim tested the override, we were pretty much outflanked by the parking lot guards, so Jim decided we should get away in the car, just far enough to give us a head start. We had no intention of stealing it. We parked it on a side street by the waterfront, and that's the last I saw of it. You both left the car together. Yes, sir. She caught herself again. Mallory. Mallory smiled. I understand. It's a hard habit to break. I'm a graduate, class of 22. Alyssa's attitude toward her questioner changed the instant she realized he'd experienced the same challenges she was in the midst of, and had succeeded. Outstanding. Mallory looked up past the dazzling bright lights and structural braces of the arching hangar ceiling to what lay beyond. When you get out there, serve on a Starfleet vessel, you'll find it's a bit less formal. If I get out there. Mallory gave her a smile of commiseration. Your honor board could break a lot of different ways. If you gave your codes to your boyfriend after the theft, the worst the board would rule is that you exercised poor judgment and not keeping your conduct advisor informed of what you were doing. That would mean demerits, maybe no liberty for a semester, but if Starfleet separated all the mids who committed minor infractions, I don't think there'd be much of an officer corps left. We tend to select for original thinkers, and that does result in the rules being pushed to their limits on a regular basis. I would never knowingly violate the Academy's honor concept, and I would never break the rules, sir. Alyssa didn't try to censor herself that time. If this man was an academy graduate, then Sir was what he deserved to be called. Mallory paused, gave her a sharp look. Again, when you get out there on the frontier, sometimes you'll find that the people and conditions you encounter don't play by the same rules we do. That's when we need those original thinkers who understand our rules but aren't afraid to make new ones. Alyssa sensed he was referring to something that had great personal significance to him, but it was not her place to ask for more details. Understood, sir, was all she could say. By the way, I'd be happy to appear at your board as a character witness. Alyssa frowned, surprised. Sir, you don't know me. Oh, I'm sure if we have further conversations, say if you happen to think of anything more that might help me understand the connection between you and your boyfriend and the override and the missing car, that would change, and I'd be able to appear on your behalf. He's offering me a deal, Alyssa thought indignantly. Sell out Jim and Sam and get off with a few demerits and a slap on the wrist. There was only one way she could respond. Thank you for your offer, sir, but this is my problem, and I will deal with it. If you don't, you might lose your whole career. But Alyssa was an academy mid, and she knew how a problem like hers can be solved every time. All I have to do is tell the truth, sir. I have faith in the system. Mallory nodded. So do I. He held out his hand to shake hers. Pleasure to meet you, Ms. Corso. But if I could offer a bit of advice? Of course, sir. It's not enough to tell the truth. You have to tell the whole truth. It was all Alyssa could do to look him in the eyes, knowing how thoroughly he had seen through her. I understand, sir. Mallory gave her a smile. Well, if you don't now, you will soon enough. Good luck with the shuttle, midshipman. Then he left. Z was beside her almost at once, using a towel to wipe an oily film of forget it, from her work gloves. Who is he? Some guy from command? Trying to get you to confess? Alyssa shook her head. Thanks, but it's my problem. The more you tell me, Corso, the better chance there is I can help. Alyssa appreciated her dorm mate's support, but somehow felt as if Z were a bit too eager to learn bad news about anyone in their class. I'll be okay. The last thing you need is more trouble. Z gave up for the moment, and they started back for the old HH, so many of its interior struts and spars revealed by the missing hull plates that it resembled the half-decayed corpse of a mechanistic dinosaur. New semester, new Z, Alyssa's dormmate said. I've learned my lessons. Alyssa was thinking furiously. Three days to go. Will I be able to say the same?